Touch the leg. Welcome to Tibet this week. We bring you news on Tibet, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and Central Tibetan Administration. Top news of the week. Kashag illuminates its position on the issue of reincarnation of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. China's mismanaged zero-COVID policy endangers Tibetan lives in Tibet, says Kashag. Sikyong concludes week-long official visit to Japan. UN member states raise concern over repression by China in Tibet. Representatives of Office of Tibet, Australia and Taiwan attends seminar on CCP tyranny in defense of democracy. Office of Tibet, Washington, D.C. convenes 20th North American Tibetan Association Conference. Representative Genkhang attends Singularity University Benelux Executive Program. VTech members submit joint appeal letter to UN officials. This week, the Kashag of the Central Tibetan Administration made it clear that no government nor any individual has the right to interfere on the matter related to the reincarnation of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. The Kashag explicitly mentioned that the system of recognizing reincarnated spiritual being is a religious practice unique to Tibetan Buddhism, and this religious activity concerning the reincarnation of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama should be conducted as per the responsibilities that His Holiness enshrines and entrusts.
Any institutions of government institutions or individuals cannot indulge or have influenced on the reincarnation of the 14th Dalai Lama, which means that the Chinese government cannot interfere in the religious tradition of the reincarnation of the 14th Dalai Lama, which they have been seeking legitimizations, which they don't have traditionally. So this Kashag makes a stand, a very clear stand on the reincarnation of 14th Dalai Lama, whereby the authorities, the sole authority belongs only to His Holiness Dalai Lama.
Kashag explained this elucidation was issued in the wake of Chinese government using various means to promote a false narrative on the issue of reincarnation in general and on the reincarnation of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama in particular. The issue of reincarnation of His Holiness the Dalai Lama continues to be discussed within and outside the community, for which the Kashag said it felt the need to present the position paper. Following the numerous reports on China's mismanagement of COVID outbreak in Tibet, the Kashag of the Central Tibetan Administration issued a press statement on Monday this week requesting the Chinese government to allow timely aid to the Tibetans who have been forced to stay in crowded quarantine facilities with food scarcity, lack of medical supplies and unhygienic living conditions.
Central Tibetan Administration also like to request or urge Chinese government not to detain those Tibetans who had expressed their opinion due to the sufferings. And if there is any need of facilities which need to be provided by the Central Tibetan administrations, we are more than happy to provide the assistance.
The Kashag has also assured extending any assistance in the form of immunity boosters, Tibetan medicines, medical equipment, nurses and the volunteers to help Tibet fight the pandemic. The Kashag also called on Beijing to adequately acknowledge the public criticisms made by Tibetans who have genuinely expressed their frustration and protect them from reprisals for the honest opinions of the government's mismanagement. Tibetan Center for Human Rights and Democracy has reported that official Chinese media sources have warned Tibetans who have been seen criticizing the Chinese government's mismanagement of the pandemic lockdowns. China's strict enforcement of its zero-COVID policy in Tibet has forced 5 Tibetans to commit suicide between 23rd to 25th of September in Lhasa city alone. China publicly reported the first COVID outbreak in Tibet on 8 August this year, with 22 cases of COVID positive in Lhasa and Ngari in the Tibetan province of Uzang. As per the statement by CTA, currently there are around 53,076 people residing in isolation centers in the so-called Tibet Autonomous Region alone. Sikyong Tsering of the Central Tibetan Administration successfully concluded his official visit to Japan on Tuesday this week. Sikyong on Thursday last week visited two renowned universities, Chipa Institute of Technology and Raitako University, where he delivered a talk on Tibet in the international context to the students and faculty members. Sikyong also participated in the seminar titled Tibet, Uyghur and South Mongolia, Occupied Nations under the CCP, Building a Common Ground, where Sikyong was the main speaker among the Japanese parliamentarians, think tank members, Uyghurs and South Mongolia representatives, and media people at the Bonkyo Civic Center Hall in Tokyo Friday last week. Sikyong attended a press conference where journalists and reporters from 12 major media in Japan interacted with him. In the final leg of his official visit to Japan, Sikyong visited the office of Tibet and Saitama Medical University and met with Tibetans in Japan, Saitama, representatives and members of Japan's 12 major Tibet support groups, Tibet House supporters, sponsors, volunteer translators and helpers, and other important guests and sponsors. The parliamentarians, university faculty members and Tibet supporters assured their continued support to the Tibet cause. UN member states raised concern over China's systematic repression in Tibet in the ongoing 51st session of the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva. States including the United States, Denmark, Germany, Sweden, Switzerland, Lithuania and the European Union on the behalf of 27 member states expressed concern over the situation in Tibet by highlighting the draconian controls over freedom of expression and other human rights violations while bringing the spotlight on human rights violations by China. Delegates from Japan, Iceland, Finland, Netherlands, Luxembourg and the United Kingdom, along with others, also continued to remain concerned over human rights violations by China. Speaking on the behalf of the Society for Threatened Peoples, UN Advocacy Officer of Tibet Bureau Geneva, Kaltin Somo, raised China's mishandling of the pandemic situation in Tibet. She urged the Council to call upon China to give timely medical facilities for COVID-infected Tibetans and to heed the June 2020 call by over 50 UN independent experts to convene a special session on China.
We urge this Council to call upon China to provide timely medical facilities for COVID-infected Tibetan people and heed the June 2020 call by over 50 UN independent experts urging this Council to convene a special session on China.
Tibetan community of Switzerland and Liechtenstein held a peaceful demonstration in front of the Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights alongside the ongoing 51st session of the UN Human Rights Council to call on the newly appointed High Commissioner for Human Rights to defend rights in Tibet on Friday last week. Representative Tile Chugi acknowledged and thanked the community members for shouldering the responsibility in speaking up for Tibetans who are suppressed and silenced by the Chinese Communist Party. The community also submitted an appeal letter calling the newly appointed High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, to heed the voices of Tibetan people. Representative Karma Singhi and Representative Bawa Gyaltsang Gyaltsen of the Office of Tibet, Australia and Taiwan attended the opening ceremony of the two-day seminar titled Confrontation with CCP Tyranny in Defense of Democracy, Taiwan Straits Relation after the 20th National Congress of CCP, organized by the Chinese Alliance for Democracy at Sydney on Saturday last week. Representative Karma Singhi called on the participants to treat Tibet as a matter of international concern, saying that Tibetan struggle is not against the Chinese people, it is against the hardline policies of the Chinese regime in Tibet, and if the Tibet issue is resolved peacefully, it will be beneficial not only for Tibetan people but also for the whole region. Representative Kelsang Gyaltsen of the Office of Tibet, Taiwan delivered the keynote speech on the topic, The Future Development of Tibet-Chinese Relations from the Perspective of Cross-Strait Relations. The event was also attended by Kelsang Thring, President of all Tibetan Community Associations of Australia. Over 50 delegates consisting of Chinese democratic activists, China experts and representatives of Australia and New Zealand alliances of victims of Chinese Communist regime attended this seminar. The Office of Tibet, Washington, D.C. convened the two-day 20th North America Tibetan Association Conference in Boston from Saturday last week. Representative Namgyal Chitup gave an inaugural welcome speech and presided over the conference. The Tibetan Association of Boston hosted the conference and provided the logistical arrangements. The conference was also attended by members of the Tibetan Parliament in Exile, Thundup Tsering and Tenzin Jigme, the Tibet Fund Director Karsur Lobsang Yenda, and International Campaign for Tibet Interim Vice President Tenju Gyatso as the special guests. The presidents and secretaries of 22 Tibetan associations attended the conference, of which 19 were from the USA and 3 from the Canada. Representative Genkhang, Office of Tibet, Brazil, was able to inform the participants of Singularity University Benelux Executive Program on Tibet, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and the efforts of the Central Tibetan Administration in resolving the Sino-Tibet conflict through dialogue. Representative Genkhang attended the program at the personal invitation of the CEO and co-founder of Singularity University, Dietrich Kursa. In line with its past tradition, Singularity University Benelux is based in Eindhoven, a city known as technology and design hub in the south of the Netherlands. For the first time in history, 8 members of the Team Tibet participated in this year's edition of Refugee Work with more than 280 other teams, composed of 1,583 people. Representative Genkhang issued a written message to encourage Team Tibet and express her gratitude to the leadership of the organizer and the Tibetans living in Belgium for the initiative. The members of the voluntary Tibet Advocacy Group submitted a joint appeal letter to UN officials of UN Human Rights Council in Geneva upon completing the Tibet Advocacy training on Wednesday last week. The appeal letter covered 5 of the most pertinent and urgent human rights violation issues in Tibet that required the UN's attention and intervention, including the reports of Tibetans being subjected to mistreatments under the pretext of zero-COVID policy in Lhasa, while proposing the UN Human Rights Council some recommendations relevant to those issues. The participants of the training were also taken on an excursion to the United Nations, where they observed and experienced the ongoing UN Human Rights Council's 51st regular session as well as the UN premises. That is all for this week. See you next time and have a great weekend.